Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker, and that was the closing bell on Wall Street. Markets surging after Iran declared the Strait of Hormuz is now open to all commercial vessels. Tehran saying it made that decision because of the new ceasefire deal reached between Israel and Lebanon. Oil prices also dropping more than 10% compared to just yesterday on hopes that the energy crisis caused by the war could be coming to an end. President Trump celebrating the news in a post on social media this morning, but saying the U.S. naval blockade of Iran's ports will remain in full effect until the U.S. and Iran reach a final peace deal. A senior Iranian official telling state TV that naval vessels are still prohibited from passing through the Strait of Hormuz and insisting non-military vessels could only pass through routes designated by Iran. Yesterday, even before this new announcement by Tehran, President Trump expressing optimism that the war will be ending soon and downplaying the spike in oil and gas prices as, quote, fake inflation.
The war in Iran is going along swimmingly. We can do whatever we want. And it should be ending pretty soon. It was perfect. I mean, it's perfect. We had to do a little journey down to Iran, and I didn't want to do that, but we had to because we can't let them have a nuclear weapon. Can't let them have a nuclear weapon.
Now, remember, the ceasefire agreement between the U.S. and Iran is set to expire in just 4 days, with major questions about whether the two sides will be able to reach a final deal in time, particularly when it comes to Iran's enriched uranium stockpile. According to a report in Axios citing officials briefed on the talks, one possibility under consideration is the release of $20 billion in Iranian frozen assets in return for Iran giving up its stockpile. President Trump dismissing that idea in a phone interview with Bloomberg, saying Iran has agreed to suspend its nuclear program indefinitely and will not receive any frozen funds from the U.S. The president also saying the main points of a deal to end the war are finalized. Now, we should note Iran has not commented on any potential final deal and has not publicly committed to suspending its nuclear program. As for the ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, that fragile agreement appears to be holding for now. This was the scene as displaced residents in Lebanon returned to their homes, many returning to towns and villages that have been reduced to rubble. Joining me now is our team of NBC News reporters, business and data correspondent Brian Chung, White House correspondent Monica Alba, Chief Foreign Affairs correspondent Richard Engel is in Tel Aviv, and with me on set, Senior National Security correspondent Courtney Cubie. Brian, I have to start with you. The market's closing. Let's talk broadly about how they've reacted to Iran's announcement that the Strait of Hormuz is open.
Yeah, Kristen, they reacted enormously positively. It's a rally on Wall Street, a new record high for both the S&P 500 and also the NASDAQ. We were just pointing out that the markets have been doing very well, but I think the bigger story here is also oil markets, which dropped. Now, I should point out that this means year to date, the stock market is now positive on the S&P 500, something like over 4% positive for 2026. It is wild to think that just a few weeks ago, that same indicator was down about 7%, 8% on the year, depending on what you were looking at. So this has been very much a story of volatility, Kristen. You could interpret the investor reaction to this however you want, but these big ups and big down days do continue to be the story as we get this news that the Strait of Hormuz is now open.
Let's talk about the oil markets, Brian. They obviously welcomed the news, but the big question for consumers, when are their gas prices going to come down? How long will it take for that connection to be made, oil dropping and then gas prices starting to fall?
Yeah, we were just talking about Wall Street, where things are looking very good. But on the Main Street side, the question all boils down to, will I be paying less at the pump as a result of this? The current average, according to AAA, is $4.08. That is down from the high that we've seen since this war began of $4.17 about 8 days ago. And now that there's further drops in oil markets, there is the expectation that that price at the pump will continue to fall as we kind of flirt with the $80 a barrel line on WTI crude oil. That's the index that we tend to look at most here in the United States. And you have some projections, like from Gas Buddy, that we can get to as low as $3.35 per gallon on a national average by Labor Day. So it's not going to happen instantly. A lot of questions over why it's going to take longer for gas prices to fall than they rose in the first place. And that is because, in part, it's just slower for these oil producers to readjust that pricing. And there's also the structural damage to a lot of these energy facilities in the region. Because of that reason, it's going to take a long time for those to come back online, even once the ships start moving through the Strait. So there's a lot of order of operations before we get back to normal after the announcement today.
Well, let's talk about the Strait of Hormuz, because there's still a lot of concerns about mines in the strait that have been dropped by the Iranians. What are you hearing from shipping companies about whether they feel like it's safe to transit the Strait of Hormuz?
Yeah, and this is where there's a bit of a disconnect between the headlines that we saw today and the actual activity happening out of the Strait of Hormuz. Of course, there's this optimism that with the announcements from both the U.S. and Iran that ships should be able to move through the strait relatively soon. And we did see some activity. There was even a cruise ship that went through the strait earlier today. But we've heard from some major shipping companies saying, whoa, pump the brakes. Hapag-Lloyd is one of these large companies, and they said in a statement today, quote, if all open issues are cleared, like insurance coverage, like clear orders of Iranian government military about the exact sea corridor to be used, we would prefer to pass the strait as soon as possible. Kristen, that doesn't sound to me like ships are making that journey right now. It sounds like these companies still have a lot of questions. So when these ships begin moving through the strait at the volume that they moved prior to this war beginning, that is going to be a question. That could also be a matter of time as well. You have to remember 110, 120 ships used to pass through a day. The current levels during the course of this war was about 5 to 10 per day. It was a massive, massive restriction.
All right. Well, I know you'll track it very closely. Brian Chung, thanks so much for joining us and starting us off. Really appreciate it. Monica, let me head over to you at the White House. So Iran is saying the strait is open. You just heard Brian talk about the fact that shipping companies still have a lot of concerns about actually passing through the strait. What are your sources there at the White House saying? What do they think is going to come next here?
Well, Kristen, I really think this is actually the one area where there does seem to be agreement between the U.S. and Iran that the strait is open for business. All of those logistical questions about exactly how it's going to work now are very valid and very fair and seemingly don't have an exact answer to. But the U.S. is at least pleased that that is one of the points that Iran is talking about publicly. The main issue of disagreement, and in terms of what could come next, is now what Iran is saying publicly about what the president is claiming Iran has agreed to for this potential framework of a peace deal. And the president has basically been on the phone with reporters and issuing social media statements for the better part of today, alleging that Iran had agreed to everything that the U.S. wanted. And now Iran is coming out and saying, wait a second, that's actually not what we have agreed to. Now, is that different than what is actually happening behind the scenes in these negotiations that are taking place behind closed doors? That's a possibility. But the president is almost trying to imply here, Kristen, that everything is taken care of, that there are going to be another round of in-person talks, and that this could all be wrapped up with a bow. That's at least what the president is trying to project. The reality check of that, though, seems to be that there are still some major, major sticking points. Now, the president, in terms, again, of what you asked there initially, is saying there could be diplomatic discussions in person from the U.S. side, meeting with Iranians through the Pakistani intermediaries as soon as this weekend, talking about the next 48 hours or so, but nothing has been firmed up. And it's also unclear, Kristen, whether that means the president would be sending Vice President Vance, like he did last weekend, to lead the U.S. delegation alongside Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. That's all still up in the air as well.
Yeah, and that is going to be one of the key questions. Do those talks actually resume in earnest? So, Monica, going back to the terms of this potential deal and what the president has said Iran has agreed to, he says they've agreed to give up all of their nuclear material, their nuclear program. Do you think, based on your conversations, that President Trump will accept anything less than that in a final deal, which Iran has signaled over and over again is not on the table for them?
Yeah, and this is really the nitty-gritty and the details that obviously are still needing to be worked out, because the president said that Iran had agreed for the U.S. to obtain its nuclear dust, the enriched uranium, and the president argued that the U.S. would be able to take it out of Iran. Iran is now saying very clearly that it has not agreed to that, has not agreed to have that inventory transferred anywhere else by the United States or moved to any other place. So that is a major gap between the two sides. sides at this point. But the president has also been talking to reporters of various media outlets and implying that Iran has also agreed essentially to suspend its nuclear program forever and not to continue enriching uranium. Initially, there had been some discussion about whether the U.S. had asked for a 20-year point. The Iranians had maybe said we would only do that for 5 years. There was some disagreement between both sides of what it really came down to. The president, again, now claiming they have basically said they will give it up forever. The Iranians have agreed to no such thing publicly. Kristen.
All right, Monica Alba at the White House for us this Friday. Monica, thank you so much. Richard, let's turn to you in Tel Aviv. Iran saying it did reopen the Strait of Hormuz because of the ceasefire that's in place between Israel and Lebanon. Give us the reality check here. Is the ceasefire holding, and what are officials there telling you?
So the ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, Israel and Hezbollah, really, because it is Israel and Hezbollah that have been doing the fighting. The agreement was made between Israel and the Lebanese government, but Hezbollah says it is signing on to this agreement. So far, it is holding. There was not any fighting today. There were no rockets fired at northern Israel. The Israelis didn't attack more positions in southern Lebanon. Instead, what we saw were tens of thousands of Lebanese. About 1.2 million Lebanese people were displaced because of Israeli attacks against Hezbollah. We saw many of them returning to their homes, returning to their villages. And in many cases, they were finding destruction, devastation, because Israel flattened several villages and killed about 2,000 people, according to Lebanese officials. But the larger issue, as it pertains to the war and the Strait of Hormuz, goes back to this issue you were just discussing with Monica. President Trump all day has been posting messages. He's been having these phone calls with journalists and saying that Iran has agreed to all of America's terms, that it will stop enriching uranium indefinitely, that the uranium stockpiles that it has, which President Trump calls the nuclear dust, will be handed over to the U.S., that they're going to have to dig for it because it was under a mountain that the United States attacked during Operation Midnight Hammer. Iran is saying that that has not been completely agreed upon, that this is still something that is up to negotiations. So we're hearing President Trump describe a deal that is already done and that he just needs to sign the dotted line. But the dotted line, however, has not been signed yet. So he's building up a tremendous amount of expectation. And we will see if over the weekend there are these talks in Pakistan, as President Trump has suggested, will take place, and if they are successful. But I think perhaps the boldest claim that President Trump made today, and if true, would be the most revealing. He said that not only did Iran announce, which Iran did announce, that the Strait of Hormuz is now open to commercial vessels, that commercial shipping can pass through as long as they stick to agreed upon navigation routes. He said that Iran is also now working with the United States to clear the mines out of the Strait of Hormuz. And that would imply a 180-degree reversal, that the two countries have gone from fighting each other to cooperating to remove the mines from the Strait of Hormuz. And if that's true, it strongly suggests that this conflict could be coming to a rapid close.
Richard, before I let you go, just give the context of how complicated these types of negotiations would be if they were to resume in the coming days, because we're talking about, of course, the nuclear material, as you're discussing right now, enriched uranium, but the history of how complicated it's been to get a deal, quite frankly.
So negotiations are generally conducted in private, and up until now, have been conducted in private, with President Trump and members of the administration describing progress, describing optimism, how they're unhappy with or happy with the tone of the Iranian negotiators. What President Trump did today was outline all of the terms that Iran has allegedly agreed to, and Iran not confirming them. Iran only confirming that the Strait of Hormuz is open to commercial vessels. this is an old issue. This is not the first time the U.S. and Israel and Iran have disagreed about Iran's nuclear program. The Iranian nuclear program has been around for many years. Iran mines uranium locally. There is uranium in Iran. It is an enormous country, and they have natural resources. And what they have been doing is enriching it. And the way you enrich uranium is you spin it through centrifuges and you make it more and more pure. And how enriched it is a factor of how dangerous it is. You can enrich uranium to low levels, and then it can be used for medicines, it can be used for fuel, or you can enrich it to a very high level, 60, 70, 80, 90%, and then it's considered weapons grade. And Iran does have some of this so-called nuclear dust, which is the more highly enriched uraniums, 60% uranium. That's the uranium that President Trump says that Iran has agreed to hand over once it can find it all and bury it out from the rubble that it is underneath right now. But Iran continues to insist that it should have the right to enrich its own domestic uranium for medical purposes and for fuel. So we will see if Iran, as President Trump now claims, agrees to permanently, indefinitely give up that capacity to enrich uranium at any level.
Yeah, and extraordinarily, the president hasn't ruled out traveling to Pakistan himself. Richard Engel, thank you so much for giving us all of that information. Please continue to stay safe. Courtney Kube, let me turn to you. So let's talk about the state of play right now. Iran saying the Strait of Hormuz is open. The U.S. saying the blockade will remain in place of naval ports. What do you make of this moment in terms of the U.S. military?
It sounds as if it's not going to really change the operations that we've seen them take over the last several days with this blockade, which is, so far, it's been somewhat uneventful, frankly. You know, I mean, the ships that they have tried to make their way through the Strait of Hormuz and then out into the Gulf of Oman. The U.S. has been able to radio them and say, hey, there's a blockade right here. You're going to have to go back to an Iranian port. And the U.S. military has even released some of those radio communications. And I mean, frankly, they're kind of boring. There's, you know, they say you got to go back to a port. They turn around, they go back to their port, and everyone says, OK. Now, you know, I'm not making light of the fact that it could definitely escalate. But the first several days, it's operated, frankly, like clockwork without any real kind of provocations.
I want to ask you about the nuclear dust. Richard Engel was just discussing it. President Trump was asked about this today. He said that he does not believe that he would need to put additional forces on the ground in the region or send U.S. troops into Iran in order to claim that. But does the military have the assets it would need in order to make that happen if Iran has, in fact, agreed?
Yes. So they have everyone forward if they were to go in on some sort of a uranium rescue mission, whether it would be to actually retrieve it, to somehow neutralize it, which would be a much more difficult mission on the spot, and then to potentially take it out of the country. I don't know how, because it would be a huge undertaking, even with a complicit government. This is a huge undertaking. So I don't know how that would not involve the U.S. military unless they brought in scores and scores of scientists who went in and they were able to dig it out and then take it out that way. But they have everything that they need there should the president decide that he wants to go in and get that uranium.
All right, Courtney Kube, thank you so much. Appreciate your being here on a Friday. Coming up, Port Authority, an energy expert, breaks down the consequences of today's developments around the Strait of Hormuz and what it all really means for oil and gas prices heading into a busy summer travel season and, of course, the midterms. Plus, the other hot war, Ukraine's ambassador to the U.S. joins me in studio after Russia's most intense attacks of this year. As President Zelensky warns the Iran conflict could put Ukraine's supply of weapons at risk. Stay with us. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. As we noted earlier, oil prices plummeted today after Iran announced the Strait of Hormuz was open to commercial traffic. Overall, oil prices have been on a roller coaster during the war. They're now at the lowest level since March 10th, but that's still about 20% higher than they were at the start of the conflict. Joining me now is John Kilduff, energy industry analyst and founding partner of Again Capital. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kristen. Good to be with you.
Well, it's wonderful to have you here on a really significant day, and I'm curious to get your assessment of what is happening right now at the Strait of Hormuz. Iran says it is open, but we know there's still a lot of consternation about actually passing.
Yes, and there's sort of a lack of clarity. Certainly, I think the theme of your reporting so far on the program today has been questions or again, a lack of clarity about what the details are here. But the oil market certainly rushed to price in a seeming end to the war and a reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. However, we're not seeing very much in the way of ship traffic going in either direction, but they're certainly mustering the ability to exit and re-enter the Strait. The important thing for folks to key on here is not just all those ships to the left on your screen, but also that we see ships going in and we get the two-way traffic going, which will then signal to the market definitively that there is now operational maritime traffic taking empty vessels in to get crude oil and refined product to be picked up and taken out. Right now, though, we are not seeing that yet. But given the statements and particularly the statements from Iran, even though there are some conditions there with regard to having to cooperate with the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard, to go through, the market's jumping all over this and taking it for what it's worth, at least on its face, Kristen, and pricing in a great discount from what the fears were literally just hours ago.
What assurances do you think shippers will need in order to get more of their tankers through the Strait, John?
They're going to need assurances, particularly from the IRGC, who seems to be the spokesperson and the unit in charge of all this, that they can pass unmolested. But also, too, there have been reporting here today about joint operation potentially to clear the Strait of mines that allegedly had been placed in the waters. Hard to determine where those mines are, how many there are. We're going to need the Iranians to come clean on that. But if they do, that would be a major step forward. And I could see oil prices taking another leg lower if it's demonstrated that the Iranians are committed to and are actively helping the U.S. or working with the U.S. to sweep the Strait of those mines. You get those two things, you'll see that traffic pick up. The big thing and why the oil prices fell so much today is because there is a burst of supply waiting to hit the market from the liberation of all those vessels you see on the left side of your screen. They are laden with fuel, laden with crude oil and other key commodities that will help to keep the price low and heading in the trajectory that all consumers want, which is down.
Well, you bring me to my next question, because as you know, if you're a consumer, what you want to see is those gas prices get lower, get to the pre-war levels. Is that realistic? And what would the timeline look like for that?
Pre-war levels are going to be a tough nut to crack. That could take up to at least through the end of the year. I think right now in trading today, we saw gasoline prices on the commodity exchange drop upwards of 20 cents a gallon. What consumers should be seeing right now is no further price increase, at least maybe a nickel over the weekend lower. And then next week, you could see upwards of 10 more cents or so lower at the pump almost immediately. The national average, though, will be hard pressed to go below $3.50 before Memorial Day. And as far as getting back below $3 on a national average, again, I wouldn't expect to see that before really December time period. Again, because we have a lot of ground to make up. We have a lot of fuel that needs to be gotten to Europe and Asia in particular. And there's going to be worries here, legitimate ones, about whether or not this peace agreement is what it's advertised to be right now, and whether or not the Strait remains open. The Iranians, unfortunately, for all of us here in this, have found a leverage point. And that leverage point is the Strait of Hormuz. And we're now seeing just how big a leverage point that is, at least as it relates to the oil market, Kristen. We fell over $10 a barrel today, 10% plus move. That's huge, particularly for this big market of ours in the petroleum complex. So that's going to be a key factor going forward.
And just very quickly, John, do you think the supply shocks could linger as well?
Absolutely. We need this Strait open. We need those vessels to get out of there and get that product to Asia, to Europe as soon as possible. Or we're going to be back to higher, not lower prices.
All right, John Kilduff, thank you so very much for joining us and for all of your insights today. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Coming up next, what's next for Kyiv and the path to peace after a week of widespread, deadly Russian attacks? Ukraine's ambassador to the U.S. joins me next in studio. Keep it right here on Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Turning now to the war in Ukraine, where Ukrainian President Zelensky is warning his country's air defense supplies from key allies are at risk due to the war in Iran, as NATO's Secretary General urges European allies not to lose sight of Ukraine amid other conflicts. It comes after a week that saw Russia launch its most intense attack of the year against Ukraine, a barrage of drones and missiles killing at least 18 people in multiple cities, according to Ukrainian officials. And joining me now is Ukraine's ambassador to the U.S., Olga Stefanishyna. Madam Ambassador, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you for having me and having attention to Ukraine.
Absolutely. Well, let's dive in, because this week Russia launched a massive missile and drone attacks. In fact, one of the largest since the war began. What can you tell us about what is actually happening, the reality on the ground right now in Ukraine?
Well, actually, speaking about the announcement of a so-called ceasefire on Easter, let's not have illusions on that it was not only less than 24 hours, but there was like multiple breaches of that. And very shortly after that, one of the largest attacks since winter happened. So with more than 700 drones across the territory of Ukraine, unfortunately, most of the losses among civilians, including two kids who one died in his bed and the other one just killed on a playground. So this is something that is not a war, it's just an aggression and a terror and a massive, most possible murder in the 21st century. And we really need to make everything we can to stop it.
I want to play you a little bit of what President Trump had to say this week when he was asked about Ukraine. Take a listen and I'll get your reaction on the other side.
Ukraine is moving along. I wish they could get along, frankly. A lot of people are dying in Ukraine. We'll see what happens. There's things happening there. We're focused so much right now on Iran, seeing if we can get that completed.
We're focused so much on Iran, he says. What is your reaction to hearing the president's comments, and how concerned are you that the United States has turned its attention away from Ukraine?
Well, indeed, there like media and political attention is in Iran. There are so many things happening there. Ukraine has not been turning a blind eye either. So we have been contributing to air defense to some of the Gulf countries. I've been working with the U.S. government. But the sad reality that war is not stopping because of the lack of attention. We have been developing our capabilities. But the very important thing that we were able to coordinate in terms of military deliveries to Ukraine. And so far we had smaller disruptions, but they were not major, not effective, the major deliveries. We hope that the war in Iran and U.S. engagement there will be over, that the order will be restored, and we could come back to diplomatic and political efforts toward ending the war in Ukraine, because this is aggression against people.
You talk about the diplomatic efforts. Are there negotiations underway right now? What's the state of talks? I think a lot of people are curious about whether that's still going on, even as this war in Iran is being waged.
Yes, absolutely. The teams are at the regular contact. So there were no major meetings since like last 3 weeks. But since that time, we also had a major exchange on the prisoners of war, with more than 100 Ukrainian prisoners of war came back to Ukraine. We have been also hearing and seeing that a group of Ukrainian kids who were abducted, they returned to Ukraine. So the talks are happening and continuing on the multiple layers. But also we see that Russia is not really interested in engaging a real diplomatic efforts, because they see that basically they're reaching the goals of their, political propaganda they were doing in Moscow, seeing the waivers in terms of sanctions, seeing the waivers in terms of personal sanctions, and the members of State Duma walking around the Congress just pretending like nothing has happened. This is not something that helps the effort in terms of mediation and the end of the war. Russia speaks the language of pressure. When they're deprived of money, resources, and the fuel of war, they really would come back to the table and start the real conversation.
I want to play you something that the vice president said now and get your reaction to that on the other side. Look.
One of the things I'm proudest that we've done as administration is we've told Europe that if you want to buy weapons, you can, but the United States is not buying weapons and sending them to Ukraine anymore. We're just out of that business.
Your reaction to that, and is Ukraine getting the military aid that it needs? What more do you need?
Well, actually, the way this message was voiced by Vice President has a very political atmosphere around that. But the reality is that, yes, we transferred from, getting the huge amount of support from the United States to buying the weapons from the United States. And I just want to bring your attention that today, this week, European leaders and American colleagues from Pentagon met, and it was Germany, United Kingdom, Norway, Netherlands, and Spain and Belgium who have contributed in terms of military packages to Ukraine. So this is happening, and this brings a lot of resilience and continuity and capabilities. But there is things that really needed from the United States, and we can buy it only from the United States.
Like what?
Like air defense, something that could really save Ukrainian cities. And the public messaging that there are disruptions, that really serves the narrative of Russia. They know, oh, they might have disruptions, so we can attack more, so we can get more ballistics, and we can kill more Ukrainians. So there are vital capabilities that are needed from U.S., but also vital capabilities which Ukraine can provide to U.S.
Just finally, what is your message to the Trump administration in this very moment?
This war needs to be over. We all know what we can do. And please make sure that Ukraine is putting so many hopes on you and that they're materialized.
All right. And quickly on Hungary, before I let you go, your reaction to the election results there and the broader implications. Hungary's new prime minister said he would not stand in the way of the $105 billion EU loan to Ukraine, but he also said he does not support fast-tracking Ukraine's membership to the EU. What do you hope Ukraine's relationship with Hungary will look like now that there's a new leader there for the first time in 16 years?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, this is a big change. This is a change which brings us to understanding that Europe is now more united than ever and more capable than ever, and we don't have this disruptor in the European house. So Ukraine will do everything we can to build the relations we need to have with our neighbors. And also we see that weaponizing of foreign leaders or a foreign country or foreign government in a domestic agenda never worked and didn't work, and people say no. This is what we saw was Putin doing for decades before the war started. But, when you start to having aggression against Ukraine militarily, you've been fighting back, but then your people will question you. And this is something that we learned also from Hungary, and we hope that the other day Putin will also be fading away like he never existed in his country.
All right, Ambassador Stefanishyna, thank you so very much for your time.
Thank you, Kristen.
And coming up after the break, fighting fuel prices, a fast food photo op, and a feud with the Pope. We'll dig into the implications of this wild week for President Trump. Stay with us on Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. The president is on the second day of a swing out west focused on the economy and affordability as he looks to downplay concerns about rising fuel prices due to the war in Iran. Last night in Las Vegas, the president dismissing those concerns and seeming to criticize advisors who warned him against going to war. Take a listen.
Don't forget, we're having some fake inflation because of the fuel, the energy prices. We have consultants, great guys that we both know, we see, and they're very talented. Sir, if you do this, fuel is going to go to $300 a barrel, right? One guy in particular who we like a lot. But I said, I don't think so. I think we're going to be good. We always find a way. Let's see what happens over the next week or so. I think you're going to be very impressed. And if you are, vote for the Republicans in the midterms, okay?
Joining me now is our panel, Francesca Chambers, White House correspondent at USA Today. Chuck Rocha, host of the Substack show, The Rocha Revolution, and co-host of the Latino Vote podcast. And Ashley Davis, former White House official in the George W. Bush administration. Thanks to all of you for being here on this Friday. Francesca, let me start with you. Fake inflation. What do you make of where the war is right now and the president's message around it?
Well, the White House is clearly trying to pivot back to this economic message. We both saw the president in Las Vegas. He has this event with Turning Point USA today as well, which Charlie Kirk used to lead. And we saw the vice president also speak to Turning Point this week. And I'll note that Vice President Vance said that, young people in the conservative movement maybe might be upset with us about Iran, the Middle East, but please come out to vote and don't just stay at home because you're upset about this one issue. So, the White House setting out the vice president and the president this week, Kristen, says that as they turn their attention to the midterms, they're certainly concerned about voter turnout among their base. And
we know that Republicans are jittery as well. Ashley, I want to put up this poll. 51% when asked how much is President Trump to blame for the rising price of gas say a lot. When Republicans look at that and the reality, gas prices are not going to come down overnight, even if this war ends this weekend. How much of a problem and concern is that for Republican candidates?
Well, I think, first of all, that doesn't surprise me at all, because the reason the gas prices are up when they were roughly $60-something a barrel, and now they are down 9% today, so down to $83, I think. But listen, I think there's a lot of people in Washington, there's a lot of Republicans around the country that are having a sigh of relief or hope, crossing their fingers that this ceasefire does hold, whether they believe in the reasons of going to war or not. But even though the gas prices or the cost of oil is going down, it's not going to happen overnight. It's probably going to take at least 2 or 3 months for them to be able to actually feel it at the pump. So we don't have that much time left until the gas prices go down. I know Chuck's going to say the higher they are, the better for him. But, it needs to stop now. And also, let's talk about this. In 2 weeks, there was going to be a war powers vote on the Hill. So this has to end, because that's not going to pass.
Well, right. We are approaching 60 days. Chuck, to that point, though, do Democrats run the risk of looking like they're cheering for high gas prices because they are potentially going to come down if oil continues to go lower?
Let's connect both of these. Let's connect the travel to the West, the Southwest, and the gas prices, because what you're seeing that there's a lot of economic anxiety and a lot with Latino voters, which overperformed for Donald Trump. And this Democrat will say that just 5-6 years ago, just 2 years ago in this last election, but now have dramatically started moving back around these two issues. He's going there because it's one of the fastest places of growing economic controversy, which is Phoenix and Las Vegas and others. Gas prices hit those communities the hardest. Working class folks, some of which voted for Donald Trump because they're looking for an outlet to this anxiety. And I think that's what we're seeing.
Well, he is on this West Coast swing, Francesca. And as you say, the reset, the goal of it is to really focus on the economy. But as you know, President Trump likes to address a range of different issues. What are aides saying in terms of whether they're confident he's going to be able to stay on message?
Well, I actually want to respond to what you were saying about why he's being out in the West. I will also note, though, that young conservatives, the youth turnout, did help propel him to victory in the last election. And so he's also underperforming right now in polling right now with young voters. So it's key parts, I think, of the electorate that got him into office that they need to turn out in the midterm elections. Now, as far as the president himself and his focus on the Iran war, yesterday when he was talking to reporters outside at the White House, he explicitly said that I want to get done with the Iran war and then we can turn back to lowering costs for Americans. So you need to look no further than what the president is saying in the 26 minutes that he's outside talking to reporters to see what's on his mind.
He laid out the strategy.
There have been a lot of different headlines coming from the president this week, including this feud with the Pope. Ashley, I want to play something that President Trump said about the Pope yesterday after this back and forth. He posted himself appearing to look like Jesus, took it down saying he thought it showed him as a doctor, criticized the Pope for making disparaging comments about the war in Iran. Let's take a look at what he had to say.
I'm not fighting with him. The Pope made a statement. He says Iran can have a nuclear weapon. I say Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. I have no disagreement with the fact the Pope can say what he wants, and I want him to say what he wants, but I can disagree.
How is this going to play with the president's base and with Republican voters, Catholics, but conservative voters who may be potentially turned off by this?
I don't know if there's going to be long-term damage, but obviously myself, this is a tough one. I'm not Catholic, but just it's a tough one to ever defend. It's only the second Truth Social he's ever pulled down, from what I understand. So he knows that it was a step too far. I'm actually surprised from the Pope's perspective that he was fighting back. I mean, it was like this little tit for tat on social media, which I'm like, this is the Pope and the President of the United States. What's happening here? But yeah, it's not helpful. But
it was extraordinary to see the back and forth check.
And every moment that he's talking about the Pope, or he's talking about the Kennedy Center, or he's talking about the West Wing, he's not talking about gas prices. He's not talking about the price of every day. It's another day that Democrats win. They're dramatically trying to get him on message around the economy because they know that's where the midterms are going to be. But then he goes down these rabbit holes of whatever that thing is of the day. It could be the war, which is a very serious thing, or another thing that's very serious. But if it doesn't have to do with gas prices or the economy, Democrats are winning that day.
Francesca, it is notable that he pulled it down, to Ashley's points, only the second time. And what's also notable is that you had Republicans on Capitol Hill, even House Speaker Mike Johnson saying he advised the president to take that post down. What do you make of that, and what Chuck is characterizing as an unnecessary distraction from the perspective of Republicans?
Well, speaking of the distraction, I was actually standing there on Monday outside of the Oval Office when he had the DoorDash delivered to the Oval Office of the McDonald's, and he clearly wanted to talk. I mean, the point of the White House was to want to talk about the no tax on tips. Then he was getting asked by one of our colleagues in the press corps region of CBS about the dispute with the Pope, as well as the memes. So sometimes the difficulty, I think, for the president isn't so much what he is saying. It's what he's posting on True Social that then becomes the distraction.
Ashley, if you were advising the president, his aides right now, what would you tell them about getting back on message?
Well, listen, I'm a huge fan of Susie Wiles. I think she does a really good job with and knowing who her boss is. And we all know that there's a lot of distractions and you can't control him. But we have to put an end to this war. Hopefully, we are at the end, and he has to get back. He's going to spend $1 billion, most likely, between now and the midterm elections. Start spending $300 million in May. So the amount of money and the engagement will be significant, but he's got to stay on message.
That's the biggest difference between 2018 and where we are right now. Folks are trying to draw comparisons, and they are. Democrats have a lot of energy. They're winning special elections. They're overperforming by the average of 17 points. But the difference is what Ashley just said. We didn't have $300 million sitting in the president's super PAC in 2018. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
All right, guys, great conversation. Thank you so much, Francesca, Chuck, and Ashley. Really appreciate it. Before we take a break, we don't get to say this very often, but if it's Friday, we actually have election results. Progressive Democrat Ana Lilia Mejia defeated Republican Joe Hathaway in the New Jersey special election to fill now Governor Mikey Sherrill's seat. Mejia continued a Democratic trend of overperformance. Chuck was just talking about this in special elections, easily winning the district. But her 11-point improvement over the 2024 presidential results, actually the Democrats' smallest overperformance in a House special election during Trump's second term. As Steve Kornacki notes, Mejia's more progressive politics may have actually cost her among moderate Democrats, particularly Jewish voters. Last night, Mejia thanking her supporters during her victory speech. Take a look.
Y'all, in November, when I jumped into this race, the odds were stacked against us. But you know, we did the impossible and we won. We are at a turning point in this nation, my people. Do you feel it? Do you want it? Are you for it? Let's do it!
Still to come, finding the third way. A longtime Democratic operative weighs in on the importance of finding common ground in an era of deeply polarizing politics. Stay with us. This is Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. With Washington and the rest of the nation in the grips of what feels like constantly intensifying partisanship, my next guest says that he has a prescription to turn down the temperature. Longtime Democratic strategist Lanny Davis says That plan is out and lays that plan out in his new book, Finding the Third Way, Lessons in the Politics of Civility from My Journey Through History. And Lanny Davis joins me now. Lanny, it's great to see you.
Thank you. Great to see you. And when I hear the title and the word civility is mentioned, everyone says, what? What civility?
well, what is the civility and what is this third way? And congratulations on your book.
So inspired by my work for President Clinton, I watched him negotiate and get along with Newt Gingrich, who wasn't exactly his best friend. He ended up inheriting multi-billion-dollar deficits and on his last day after 2 terms had a surplus because he was able to find a third way with Newt Gingrich. They didn't personally like each other, but they found common ground, which is balancing the budget is the moral way of governing. Because if you don't balance the budget, you're borrowing and then letting your children pay the tab.
Let me read a little portion of your book and discuss it with you. You say, quote, "We must find a better way to win over voters who have abandoned us than shaming people who don't agree with us. We can and should oppose politicians like Donald Trump when they challenge democracy and our Constitution, but we can do so and still respect the vast majority of those who voted for him." Why is that the right path forward? And do you think there's a politician right now in your mind who embodies that approach?
Well, yes, there are several governors that we have that embody that approach because they're elected in Trump states. Take Andy Beshear in Kentucky. So, of course, there is a third way, and the current way is either 100% you're terrible or I'm right, and accusations. The Clinton way, my third way, is find common ground and respect the differences. So we can distinguish between Trump's voters, many of whom are friends of mine, and Democrats who voted for Trump, and the man himself whose conduct and character I have serious problems with.
But, Lanny, what do you say to voters who say this is such a uniquely divided moment? You have family feuds at holidays in ways that we have not seen before. How can people break through this gridlock to do what you're saying, to find that common ground when they're not even talking to each other, giving each other a chance in so many instances?
So the short answer is listen first before you accuse and ask questions and see if you can find common ground. That's the short answer. And my one example of many is the Iran war. If you ask a Trump voter enough times what's bothering you about Donald Trump, I know you voted for him. There's going to be an answer that I will say, I agree with you on that. Let's find common ground on that issue, such as the Iran war.
You talk about your experience at Yale Law School, which you write about distinguishing between liberals and conservatives. And a professor named Alexander Bickel, let me read a little bit. You described him as conservative. You say, over the years, this confusion about the most accurate label to describe Professor Bickel or others taught me an important lesson. The answer, I eventually concluded, is that it's better to avoid all labels if possible and instead to rely on facts. It also follows that steering clear of simplistic labels is the first step toward avoiding absolutist judgments about which side is good and which side is evil. Has this society become too obsessed with labels, and how do we break out of it?
First of all, I have to say, whoever wrote that's pretty good. Labels, identity politics, especially in the Democratic Party, where everyone has to have a cultural or ethnic identity, and then you have to. The answer is talk to each other and listen and respect. I mentioned to you earlier, I have lots of friends who voted for Donald Trump and said, I don't like Trump, I don't like his behavior, I don't like a lot, but you guys don't give me a better alternative. That's a central reason why I wrote the book, because in the Clinton White House, we didn't know what was conservative or what was liberal. Is balancing the budget conservative or liberal? It's a label. I know that asking our children to pay the bills for what we're spending today using a credit card is wrong. And that's the third way.
Do you think Bill Clinton, if he were in office today, would be able to break through this current gridlock, which is unique to what he experienced?
I have no doubt, but it's not just because I've been a friend of his for so long, and of course, even longer with his wife, Hillary. He had a method. And he proved it with Newt Gingrich. They were on opposite sides, and it was quite polarized when Gingrich took over the House of Representatives. He started out by finding
something in common with Gingrich, which is, as governor of Arkansas, he had to balance the budget every year. That was his starting point, was being a fiscal conservative. But on social programs, he was a liberal. Even though I'm supposed to use the word progressive, I don't know why Franklin Roosevelt called himself a liberal. So what he did was to say, yes, we're a liberal, but we're reformed liberals. We have a but after social programs and government programs. The but is individual responsibility and community responsibility. You don't get government assistance unless you take individual responsibility.
Lanny Davis, congratulations on the new book. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we will be back Monday with more Meet the Press Now. And if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press on your local NBC News station. I'll have an exclusive interview with New York City Mayor Zoran Mamdani. Plus, NBC's Steve Kornacki joins me at the big board with a brand new NBC News Decision Desk poll. Don't miss it. There's more ahead on NBC News Now.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.